The stagecoach rattled to a halt in front of the Double T Ranch, just as the sun began its descent behind the Montana mountains, and Prudence Eleanor stepped down onto the dusty ground with trembling hands, knowing she was about to meet the man her sister had abandoned. The year was 1882, and the journey from Boston had taken nearly 2 weeks of bone-jarring travel across an untamed land that both terrified and fascinated her. Prudence clutched her worn carpetbag tighter as she surveyed the sprawling ranch before her, taking in the weathered wooden buildings, the corrals filled with horses, and the vast expanse of prairie stretching endlessly toward the horizon. This was Montana territory, wild and unforgiving, and she had never felt more out of place in her 21 years of life. A tall figure emerged from the main house, his silhouette cutting an imposing shape against the fading light. As he approached, Prudence could make out more details: broad shoulders, sun-bronzed skin, dark hair that curled slightly at his collar, and eyes that held a mixture of hope and wariness. This had to be Thomas Irving, the rancher who had sent for a bride from the matrimonial advertisements back east. "Miss Eleanor." His voice was deep, roughened by the prairie wind and years of shouting commands across open range. "Yes, sir, Prudence Eleanor." She tried to keep her voice steady, though her heart hammered against her ribs. Thomas removed his hat, revealing the full extent of his handsome features. He looked to be about 26 or 27, with strong, angular lines to his jaw and a scar that cut through his left eyebrow, giving him a roguish appearance despite the genuine uncertainty in his expression. "I was expecting someone else." He said it quietly, almost to himself, and Prudence felt her stomach drop. "My sister, yes, Penelope. She was supposed to come, but 3 days before our departure, she ran away with a theater troupe heading to New York." The words tumbled out faster than she intended. Father was beside himself with worry, not just for her safety, but because you had already paid for the travel expenses and made arrangements. I volunteered to come in her place. The marriage broker said it would be acceptable, that you had requested a bride from the Eleanor family, and I am an Eleanor. I hope this arrangement does not displease you too greatly." Thomas studied her face in the dimming light, his expression unreadable. Prudence knew she looked nothing like her vivacious sister. Where Penelope was blonde and curvaceous, Prudence was dark-haired and willowy. Penelope commanded attention in every room she entered, while Prudence preferred the quiet comfort of books and thoughtful conversation. She had always been the sensible one, the responsible daughter who helped their father with his accounting work and managed the household after their mother died. "Come inside," Thomas finally said, gesturing toward the house. "You must be exhausted from your journey. We can discuss everything after you have had a chance to rest and eat something." The inside of the ranch house surprised her. She had expected rough bachelor quarters, but the main room was spacious and well-maintained. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and though the furniture was simple, everything was clean and carefully arranged. A woman emerged from what Prudence assumed was the kitchen, wiping flour-dusted hands on her apron. "This is Maria," Thomas said. "She helps with the cooking and housework." "Maria, this is Miss Prudence Eleanor." Maria was a Mexican woman in her 40s with kind eyes and a warm smile. "Welcome, miss. You must be hungry. I will prepare something." "Thank you," Prudence said gratefully. Thomas showed her to a small bedroom off the main hall. "This will be your room. Take your time settling in. I will be outside tending to some evening chores." After he left, Prudence sank onto the narrow bed and allowed herself a moment to absorb everything that had happened. She had left behind everything familiar: the cobblestone streets of Boston, the harbor with its ships and bustle, her father's modest but comfortable home. She had volunteered for this arrangement partly out of duty, but also, if she was honest with herself, out of a desperate desire for something more than the life she had been living. At 21, she was considered nearly a spinster by Boston standards. She had received a few half-hearted proposals from men who saw her as suitable but uninspiring. The prospect of becoming a mail-order bride to a Montana rancher had seemed both terrifying and thrilling. But now, seeing the disappointment in Thomas Irving's eyes when he realized she was not her beautiful sister, Prudence wondered if she had made a terrible mistake. That evening, they sat across from each other at the long wooden table while Maria served a hearty stew with fresh bread. Thomas ate in silence for several minutes before finally speaking. "I should explain my situation," he began, setting down his spoon. "I have been running this ranch for 4 years since my father died. It is hard work, and I have built something good here. I have a foreman, Jack, and about 8 ranch hands who work the cattle and horses. We supply beef to the mining towns up north and breed some of the finest quarter horses in Montana Territory. But running a ranch this size, living this life, it is not something a man should do alone." Prudence nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I am not a romantic man, Miss Eleanor. I do not have pretty words or fancy manners, but I am honest and I work hard and I can provide a good life for a wife. I sent for a bride because I need a partner, someone to build a life without here." He paused, his fingers drumming on the table. "Your sister's photograph showed a beautiful woman, and her letters were charming. I will not lie and say I am not disappointed that she chose not to come. But what matters more than beauty or charm is character and commitment. Can you tell me honestly, are you here because you want to be, or only out of obligation to your family?" The question caught Prudence off guard. She considered lying, painting herself as wholly enthusiastic, but something about Thomas's direct honesty compelled her to match it. "Both," she admitted. "I felt obligated when Penelope ran away. My father had given his word, and he is not a man who breaks promises. But I also came because my life in Boston held nothing for me anymore. My mother died 2 years ago, and my father has since remarried a woman with daughters of her own. They are kind enough, but I felt like a ghost in what used to be my home. I have no romantic illusions about the West, Mr. Irving, but I do have hope that I might build something meaningful here, that I might be useful and valued in ways I was not back East." Thomas leaned back in his chair, studying her with those penetrating eyes. "That is a more honest answer than I expected. I promised myself I would not begin this arrangement with deception," Prudence said. "If we are to make a life together, it should be built on truth." Something shifted in Thomas's expression, a softening around his eyes. "I can respect that." He stood, walked to the window, and looked out at the darkening prairie. "Here is what I propose. You have traveled a long way, and you deserve a chance to see what this life would actually entail before committing yourself to it. Stay for 2 weeks as my guest, not my betrothed. I will show you the ranch, introduce you to the workings of this place. You can see what being a rancher's wife would mean. At the end of those 2 weeks, if you want to return to Boston, I will pay for your passage and we will part as friends. If you decide to stay, we will be married in Williamsburg and begin our life together properly." Relief flooded through Prudence, though she had not realized how tense she had been until that moment. "That seems more than fair. Thank you, Mr. Irving." "Call me Thomas," he said, turning back to face her. "If we are going to spend 2 weeks getting to know each other, we should at least use given names. Then you should call me Prudence." The next morning, Prudence woke to the sound of roosters crowing and men's voices calling to each other across the yard. Dawn light filtered through the simple curtains of her room, and for a moment, she forgot where she was. Then reality settled back over her like a familiar shawl, and she rose to dress for her first full day on the Double T Ranch. Maria had laid out a split riding skirt and a simple cotton blouse the night before. "For the ranch," she had explained. "Your Eastern dresses will not be practical here." Prudence changed into the borrowed clothes, feeling strange in the divided skirt but appreciating the practicality of it. When she emerged into the main room, Thomas was already up, sitting at the table with a cup of strong coffee and going over what appeared to be account books. He looked up as she entered and gestured to the coffee pot on the stove. "Help yourself. Maria will not be here for another hour, but she left biscuits warming in the oven." Prudence poured herself coffee and retrieved a biscuit, then joined him at the table. "What are you working on?" "Supply orders and breeding records. I am trying to decide which mares to breed this season." He seemed surprised by her interest. "It is tedious work." "May I see?" She set down her coffee and leaned slightly to look at his ledger. Her years helping her father with his accounting made the columns of numbers and notes familiar territory. "Your handwriting is actually quite neat. I have seen much worse." Thomas turned the book toward her. "Your father was a businessman, an import merchant. Small scale, mostly textiles and some specialty goods from Europe. I managed most of his bookkeeping after my mother became ill." She traced a finger down one column. "You have a good system here, very organized. That surprises you." "Most men I knew in Boston could barely balance their personal accounts, let alone manage business ledgers." She glanced up at him with a slight smile. "I suppose I should not have assumed Western ranchers would be less capable. We might live in rough country, but that does not mean we are simple." There was no anger in his words, just statement of fact. Running a successful ranch requires good business sense as much as it requires skill with cattle and horses. They fell into comfortable conversation about ranch management, and Prudence found herself genuinely interested in learning about the economics of raising cattle and breeding horses. Thomas seemed pleased by her questions, answering them thoughtfully and without condescension. After breakfast, he took her on a tour of the ranch. They walked through the stables first, where Prudence met some of the most beautiful horses she had ever seen. Thomas explained his breeding program, how he was working to develop horses with the speed and agility needed for ranch work, combined with the endurance to withstand Montana winters. "This is Juniper," he said, stopping at a stall that held a magnificent bay mare with intelligent eyes. "She is my best breeding mare, daughter of a foundation sire I bought from Texas 5 years ago." He reached out to stroke the horse's nose with surprising gentleness. "She is due to foal in about 6 weeks. She is beautiful." Prudence cautiously extended her own hand, delighted when the mare's soft nose nuzzled her palm. "I have only ridden a few times, carriage horses in the park back home. Would you like to learn properly?" Thomas asked. "A rancher's wife needs to know how to handle a horse. This country is too big to navigate on foot." "I would like that very much." Over the next several days, Thomas proved to be a patient teacher. He started Prudence on a gentle gelding named Copper, showing her the basics of Western riding, which was quite different from the English style she had briefly experienced in Boston. She appreciated that he never made her feel foolish when she made mistakes, instead offering quiet corrections and genuine praise when she got something right. During their rides around the ranch, Prudence began to understand the immense scope of Thomas's operation. The Double T covered thousands of acres, from prairie grasslands to foothills riddled with streams and stands of pine. Cattle grazed in distant pastures, tended by cowboys who waved as Thomas and Prudence rode past. The ranch supported not just Thomas but the families of his workers, and she began to see the weight of responsibility he carried. One afternoon, they stopped to rest the horses near a creek that tumbled down from the mountains. The water ran clear and cold, and cottonwood trees provided dappled shade. Thomas dismounted first, then helped Prudence down, his hands firm and steady at her waist. "This is my favorite spot on the whole ranch," he admitted, leading the horses to drink. "When things get overwhelming, I come here to think." Prudence settled on a smooth rock near the water's edge. "What do you think about when you come here?" Thomas was quiet for a moment, staring at the flowing water. "My parents sometimes. My father built this ranch from nothing. He came west after the Civil War with barely enough money to buy land and a small starter herd. My mother followed him from Ohio, leaving behind everything familiar because she loved him enough to share his dream." He picked up a stone and tossed it into the creek. "They had 20 good years together before a fever took her. My father never really recovered. He kept working, kept building, but something in him broke when she died. 3 years later, his heart gave out." "I am sorry," Prudence said softly. "Losing both parents must have been terrible." "It was. But they taught me important things before they died. My father taught me how to run this ranch, how to lead men and make tough decisions. My mother taught me that the West is no place for the faint of heart, but it can be a good place for people willing to work hard and support each other." He turned to look at her. "That is what I want, Prudence, a partnership like they had, not some fantasy of romance, but something real and lasting." "That is what I want too," she found herself saying. "I have never believed in fairy tales. My parents had a practical marriage that grew into genuine affection. They respected each other, worked together. I saw how that kind of partnership could sustain people through hardships." "Then maybe you are exactly who was meant to come here after all," Thomas said quietly. The words sent warmth through her chest, a feeling she could not quite name. She was beginning to understand that Thomas Irving was a far more complex and thoughtful man than she had initially assumed. Beneath his rough exterior was someone who valued honesty, hard work, and genuine connection. As the days passed, Prudence found herself settling into the rhythm of ranch life more easily than she had anticipated. Maria taught her how to cook meals hearty enough to sustain men who worked from dawn to dusk, how to preserve vegetables for the long Montana winter, and how to mend the heavy canvas and leather that made up so much of the ranch equipment. The work was physically demanding in ways her life in Boston had never been, but Prudence discovered she enjoyed the tangible results of her labor. She also began to know the people who made the ranch function. Jack Morrison, the foreman, was a weathered man in his 50s who had worked for Thomas's father and stayed on after his death. He was gruff but fair, and he clearly had deep loyalty to Thomas. The ranch hands were a mixture of young cowboys learning their trade and experienced men who had spent their lives working cattle. They treated Prudence with respectful curiosity, clearly wondering if she would become their boss's wife. One evening, nearly 10 days into her trial period, a commotion arose from the direction of the barn. Prudence was helping Maria prepare supper when they heard shouting. Thomas rushed past the window, and without thinking, Prudence followed him outside. Several of the hands had gathered near one of the corrals, where a horse was clearly in distress. As Prudence got closer, she realized it was Juniper, the pregnant mare Thomas had shown her on her first tour. "She is foaling early," Jack was saying as Thomas vaulted over the corral fence. "Something is wrong. The foal is not positioned right." Thomas's face was grim as he approached the struggling mare, speaking to her in low, soothing tones. Prudence watched as he carefully examined the situation, his hands gentle despite their size and strength. "The foal is breech," he announced. "I need to turn it, but I cannot do this alone. Jack, I need you to keep her as calm as possible." For the next hour, Prudence watched as Thomas worked to save both the mare and her foal. It was exhausting, dangerous work. Juniper was in pain and frightened, and several times her thrashing nearly caught Thomas with a hoof. But he never lost patience, never gave up. He spoke constantly to the mare, his voice steady and reassuring even as sweat poured down his face from the exertion. Prudence found herself gripping the corral fence so tightly her knuckles turned white. She barely breathed as Thomas finally managed to reposition the foal. Then, with agonizing slowness, the birth progressed as it should. When the foal finally slipped free, landing in the straw with a wet thump, a collective exhale went up from everyone watching. Thomas immediately cleared the foal's airways and stimulated it to breathe. For several terrible seconds, nothing happened. Then the tiny creature drew a shuddering breath and released a weak whinny. Around her, the ranch hands cheered. Thomas slumped back on his heels, exhausted but smiling. Prudence realized she was crying, tears streaming down her face from the sheer emotional intensity of what she had witnessed. Life and death had hung in the balance, and through skill and determination, Thomas had saved them both. Later, after Juniper and her foal had been settled and stabilized after Thomas had cleaned up and the ranch hands had dispersed to their evening meals, Prudence found him sitting on the porch of the main house, staring out at the darkening landscape. "May I join you?" she asked softly. He nodded and she settled into the chair beside him. "That was remarkable," she said, "what you did tonight. It is part of the job, though I will admit it never gets easier. Every time we lose an animal, especially in circumstances like that, it feels like a failure. But you did not lose them. They both lived because of you. This time." He rolled his shoulders, working out the tension. "There have been other times when I could not save them. That is the reality of this life, Prudence. There is beauty here and freedom and the satisfaction of building something meaningful. But there is also hardship and loss and moments when you question whether you are strong enough to keep going. I think," Prudence said carefully, "that strength is not about never doubting or never failing. It is about continuing despite those things." Thomas turned to look at her, his expression unreadable in the dim light. "You have surprised me, Prudence Eleanor. When you first arrived, I will be honest, I thought you were too soft for this life. A Boston lady used to comfort and society. But I was wrong. You have worked hard these past 10 days without complaint. You ask good questions and listen to the answers. You have treated everyone here with respect, from me to the youngest stable hand. And tonight, when things got difficult, you did not faint or flee. You stood there and watched, even though I could see it upset you. I wanted to understand," she said quietly. "This life you are offering to share with me, I wanted to see all of it, not just the pleasant parts. And now that you have seen it, we have 5 more days until your trial period ends, but I think you know enough now to make a decision. Do you want to go back to Boston, or do you want to stay and become my wife?" Prudence's heart hammered in her chest. She thought about Boston, about the life she had left behind. Then she thought about the past 10 days, about learning to ride across open prairie, about the satisfaction of good hard work, about Maria's friendship and the respect she had earned from the ranch hands. She thought about Thomas himself, about the quiet strength and basic decency that defined him. "I want to stay," she heard herself say. "If the offer is still open, I want to marry you and make a life here." Thomas stood, extended his hand to help her up. When she took it, he pulled her closer, his other hand coming up to gently cup her face. "Before we make this official, there is something I need to tell you." "What is it?" "I think I might already be falling in love with you," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I know we agreed this would be a practical arrangement, a partnership based on mutual respect. And I will honor that if that is all you want. But I need you to know that somewhere over these past 10 days, You stopped being just a solution to my problem and became someone I look forward to seeing each morning, someone whose opinions I value, someone who makes me want to be better." Prudence felt her breath catch. She had not expected this, had not dared to hope that the growing feelings in her own heart might be reciprocated. "Thomas, you do not have to say anything," he interrupted. "I just needed you to know before we go forward that this is not just a business arrangement for me anymore." "But I want to say something," Prudence insisted. She reached up to cover his hand with her own. "These feelings you describe, I have been experiencing them too. When I volunteered to come here in Penelope's place, I thought I was making a practical choice. But now, I understand that maybe it was something more. Maybe it was fate putting me where I was meant to be." Thomas leaned his forehead against hers, a gesture so intimate it made her shiver. "I am glad fate chose you instead," he whispered. Then he kissed her, gentle at first, almost tentative. But when Prudence responded, leaning into him, the kiss deepened. It was nothing like the chaste pecks she had exchanged with would-be suitors back in Boston. This was real and raw and full of promise. When they finally pulled apart, both slightly breathless, Thomas smiled. It transformed his whole face, erasing the lines of worry and responsibility that usually marked his features. "I guess we should tell everyone there will be a wedding." "I suppose we should," Prudence agreed, returning his smile. 3 days later, on a bright Saturday morning, Prudence Eleanor became Mrs. Thomas Irving in a simple ceremony at the Williamsburg church. The small town, located about 15 miles from the Double T Ranch, had turned out to witness the occasion. Maria served as her attendant, having helped Prudence alter one of her nicer Boston dresses into something suitable for a wedding. Jack stood up for Thomas, and the ranch hands filled several pews, scrubbed clean and wearing their Sunday best. The minister, Reverend Samuel Hastings, was a kind man in his 60s who had come west to minister to the mining communities and had stayed to serve the ranchers and farmers of the territory. His service was brief but meaningful, focusing on partnership and commitment rather than flowery romance. When Thomas slipped the simple gold band onto her finger and said, "I do," Prudence felt a sense of rightness settle over her. This was where she belonged. This was the life she was meant to live. The reception was held at the ranch, with tables set up in the yard and enough food to feed not just the ranch community but several neighboring families who had been invited. Someone produced a fiddle, and before long, people were dancing in the dusty yard as the sun began its descent. Thomas claimed his bride for the first dance, holding her close as they swayed to a simple waltz. "Are you happy?" he asked, his breath warm against her ear. "Yes," Prudence answered honestly, "more than I expected to be." "I will do everything in my power to keep you that way," he promised. That night, after the guests had departed and the ranch had settled into peaceful quiet, Thomas carried Prudence over the threshold of their home. Not the guest room she had been occupying, but the larger bedroom that had been his alone until now. He set her down gently, and for a moment, they simply looked at each other. Then Prudence stepped forward and began unbuttoning his shirt, her fingers steady despite her nervousness. Thomas helped her with the buttons of her dress, his touch reverent. What followed was tender and intimate, a physical joining that sealed the emotional connection they had been building. Afterward, lying in Thomas's arms as moonlight streamed through the window, Prudence thought about how drastically her life had changed in just 2 weeks. She had expected to make the best of a difficult situation. Instead, she had found genuine love and a true partner. "What are you thinking about?" Thomas asked, his fingers tracing lazy patterns on her shoulder. "About Penelope," Prudence admitted. "I was so angry with her when she ran away. It seemed so selfish and irresponsible. But now I find myself almost grateful. If she had not followed her heart to that theater troupe, I would never have come here. I would never have found you. Write to her, Thomas suggested. Tell her you have forgiven her and that you are happy. Family is important, even when they frustrate us. It was such a thoughtful suggestion, so typical of the man she was learning Thomas was beneath his stoic rancher exterior. I will, she promised. Tomorrow. The months that followed were a period of adjustment and growth for both of them. Prudence threw herself into learning everything required to be an effective ranch wife. She became skilled at managing the household, at preserving food for winter, at keeping the complex accounts that tracked everything from cattle sales to feed purchases. She also continued improving her riding, eventually becoming confident enough to accompany Thomas on longer trips around the ranch. The ranch hands, initially skeptical of an Eastern bride, gradually accepted her as one of them after she proved herself willing to work hard and get her hands dirty. She earned particular respect one afternoon when a sudden storm threatened newly cut hay. Without being asked, Prudence joined everyone else in racing to get the hay under cover before the rain ruined it. By the time they finished, she was exhausted and soaked through, but the hay was saved. Thomas had pulled her aside that evening, ignoring her protests about being muddy and wet, and kissed her thoroughly. "You never stop surprising me," he had said with genuine admiration. As summer gave way to autumn, Prudence discovered she was pregnant. Maria guessed before she did, noticing Prudence's exhaustion and morning queasiness. When Prudence confirmed it with Thomas, his joy was immediate and unreserved. He had swept her into his arms, spinning her around despite her laughing protests, and declared it the best news he could have imagined. The pregnancy progressed smoothly through fall and into winter. Montana winters were harsh, far more brutal than anything Prudence had experienced in Boston. Snow piled high around the ranch buildings, and temperatures dropped so low that water left out overnight would freeze solid. But the house was snug and warm, and Prudence found a certain coziness in being snowbound with Thomas, working together on indoor projects and planning for the spring. Christmas was a revelation. Prudence had feared it might be a lonely affair, so far from everything she had known. Instead, Maria's extended family joined them, along with several of the ranch hands who had nowhere else to go. They decorated with pine boughs and holly, and Maria taught Prudence how to make traditional Mexican dishes that complemented the roast beef Thomas prepared. It was different from Boston Christmases, but warmer and more genuine in many ways. As her pregnancy advanced, Thomas became increasingly protective. He insisted she limit her riding and heavy work, though Prudence chafed at the restrictions. They compromised, with her agreeing to be more cautious in exchange for him not treating her like she was made of glass. Women have been having babies since the beginning of time. She reminded him one evening as he fussed over her after she had spent the afternoon baking. "I am pregnant, not invalid. I know," he said, pulling her into his arms, "but you are my whole world, Prudence. The thought of anything happening to you terrifies me." His honesty melted her irritation. She leaned into him, resting her head against his chest. "Nothing will happen. I am strong, and I have you and Maria, and the doctor in Williamsburg is only a few hours away if needed." Spring came slowly to Montana, patches of snow lingering in shaded areas even as new grass began pushing through in sunny spots. Prudence felt huge and ungainly, ready for the pregnancy to end. She helped Maria with spring cleaning, prepared clothing and blankets for the baby, and tried not to worry about the approaching birth. On a warm April evening, her water broke while she was helping prepare dinner. Thomas immediately sent Jack racing for the doctor in Williamsburg, while Maria calmly helped Prudence to the bedroom and began preparations for the birth. The labor was long and difficult, lasting through the night and into the next afternoon. Thomas refused to leave, pacing the hallway outside the bedroom despite Maria's assurances that this was normal. When the doctor arrived, he confirmed that everything was progressing as it should, just slowly. Finally, as the sun began its descent on the second evening, Prudence gave birth to a healthy baby boy. When Maria placed the squalling infant in her arms, Prudence felt a surge of love so intense it brought tears to her eyes. Thomas was allowed in then, looking haggard from worry and lack of sleep. But when he saw his wife and son, his whole face transformed with wonder and joy. He approached the bed carefully, as though afraid to disturb them. "A boy," Prudence said softly, shifting so Thomas could see better. "We have a son." Thomas reached out tentatively to touch the baby's tiny hand. The infant's fingers immediately closed around one of his father's, gripping with surprising strength. "He is perfect," Thomas whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "You are perfect. Thank you, Prudence. Thank you for this gift, for our son, for everything you have brought to my life." They named him Nathan Thomas Irving, honoring no particular family tradition but simply choosing a name they both liked. Nathan proved to be a healthy, hungry baby who kept them both exhausted but happy in those first weeks. Prudence marveled at how naturally Thomas took to fatherhood. Despite having no experience with infants, he was gentle and attentive, taking over nighttime feedings when possible, walking Nathan around the room when the baby fussed, speaking to him in that same calm voice he used with frightened horses. She fell even more deeply in love with her husband watching him with their son. As Nathan grew from infant to baby to toddler, the ranch continued to thrive. Thomas expanded their cattle operation, and his horse breeding program gained recognition throughout Montana territory. They hired additional hands, built a new barn, and improved the main house, adding a proper parlor and expanding the kitchen. Prudence maintained correspondence with her father, and even with Penelope, who had eventually settled in New York and found modest success performing in small theaters. Her sister's letters were full of excitement about her unconventional life, and she seemed genuinely happy that Prudence had found contentment as well. Their father visited once, making the long journey west to meet his grandson. He stayed for a month and left admitting that his practical daughter had found the life that suited her best. When Nathan was 2 years old, Prudence became pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect. Their second child, a daughter they named Sarah Margaret, arrived on a snowy December morning. Nathan was fascinated by his tiny sister, wanting to be involved in everything related to her care. The years passed in a rhythm of seasons and work. There were hard times, a particularly brutal winter when they lost several head of cattle, a summer drought that tested everyone's endurance, the death of Jack Morrison from a heart ailment that hit the whole ranch community hard. But there were far more good times: Nathan learning to ride, Sarah's first steps, profitable cattle drives, new foals each spring, community gatherings, and quiet evenings with just the family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Thomas took Prudence back to the creek where he had first told her about his parents, where their relationship had begun shifting from practical arrangement to genuine love. They left the children with Maria for the afternoon and rode out together, racing across the spring prairie like the young people they still were at 37 and 31. At the creek, they dismounted and settled in their old spot, watching the water flow as it had for countless years. "Do you ever regret it?" Thomas asked, breaking their comfortable silence. "Giving up your life in Boston, taking a chance on a stranger?" Prudence turned to look at him, taking in the face she knew better than her own now, seeing the silver just beginning to thread through his dark hair, the deeper lines around his eyes from years of squinting against bright prairie sun. "Not once," she said honestly. "This life, this place, you and our children, this is everything I never knew I wanted. What about you? Do you ever wish Penelope had come instead of me?" Thomas pulled her close, kissing her temple. "Not for a single moment. I told you that first night that maybe you were who was meant to come all along. I was right. You are exactly who I needed, who this place needed. You made this house a home, Prudence. You made me a better man. Whatever fate or luck or divine intervention sent you here instead of your sister, I am grateful for it every single day." They sat together as the afternoon lengthened, talking about everything and nothing, their children's futures, plans for the ranch, memories of the past decade. Eventually, they would need to head back, to resume the countless responsibilities that came with running a successful ranch and raising a family. But for this moment, they simply existed together in perfect contentment. As they mounted their horses for the ride home, Prudence looked back at the creek one more time. She thought about the frightened, uncertain woman who had arrived at the Double T Ranch 10 years ago, stepping off that stagecoach into an unknown future. That woman had been brave enough to take a chance, honest enough to speak her fears, and open enough to accept love when it was offered. The ranch appeared in the distance, smoke rising from the chimneys, the setting sun painting everything golden. Somewhere in that sprawling complex of buildings, their children were likely causing some sort of mischief under Maria's watchful eye. There would be dinner to prepare, animals to tend, accounts to review, and 1,000 other tasks that made up their daily life. But there would also be laughter and love, the satisfaction of meaningful work, and the deep contentment that came from building something lasting together. Prudence had left Boston as a substitute, a replacement for the bride who ran away. But she had arrived at the Double T Ranch exactly when and how she was meant to, and she had found not just a husband, but a true partner and the deepest love she could have imagined. Years continued to unfold with their predictable mixture of joy and challenge. Nathan grew into a serious young man who shared his father's talent with horses and his mother's head for numbers. By the time he was 15, he was effectively managing much of the breeding operation, making decisions that proved wise beyond his years. Sarah, meanwhile, inherited her mother's practicality combined with a wild streak that kept everyone on their toes. She was as comfortable in the saddle as any of the ranch hands and had a gift with the cattle dogs that proved invaluable during roundups. Thomas's hair went increasingly gray, though his strength and stamina remained impressive. Prudence sometimes caught him watching her with an expression of quiet wonder, as though he still could not quite believe his good fortune. She knew the feeling, experiencing it herself when she woke beside him on lazy Sunday mornings, or when the whole family gathered around the dinner table, or during those rare, quiet moments when they could steal time alone together. When Montana achieved statehood in 1889, Williamsburg celebrated for 3 days straight. The Double T Ranch hosted a massive gathering, with neighboring ranchers and their families coming from miles around. As Prudence moved through the crowd, ensuring everyone had enough food and drink, she reflected on how much had changed since her arrival 7 years earlier. She was no longer an outsider or an Easterner trying to fit in. She was Mrs. Thomas Irving, respected member of the community, successful rancher's wife, mother, and friend to many. That evening, as the party continued in the yard, Thomas found her taking a brief rest on the porch. He settled beside her, handing her a glass of cool lemonade. "Tired?" he asked. "A little," she admitted, "but happy. This is quite a celebration." "Montana's statehood is worth celebrating," Thomas agreed, "though I might be more excited about what it means for the ranch." Statehood will bring better roads, maybe a railroad spur closer to us, more markets for our cattle and horses. Always thinking about the business, Prudence teased gently. Someone has to. He caught her hand, threading his fingers through hers. Though lately I have been thinking about something else too. What is that? Succession. Planning for the future. Nathan will be old enough to take over substantial responsibility in a few years, and Sarah has already made it clear she wants to be involved in running the ranch. I think it might be time to start officially bringing them into the business side of things, teaching them everything they will need to know. Prudence squeezed his hand. You are thinking about legacy. I suppose I am. Thomas was quiet for a moment, watching their friends and neighbors celebrate in the yard below. My father built this ranch from nothing, and I have spent my adult life growing it into something even better. I want to pass it on to our children knowing they have the skills and knowledge to continue the work, to build on what we have created. They will, Prudence assured him. Look at them, Thomas. Nathan has your dedication and vision. Sarah has your courage and determination. They both have strong values and good hearts. Whatever the future brings, they will be ready for it. Over the next several years, Thomas and Prudence began gradually transferring responsibility to their children. Nathan, at 18, went on his first major cattle-buying trip to Texas, returning with a small herd of excellent breeding stock and invaluable experience. Sarah, at 16, impressed everyone by successfully managing the ranch for a full week, while Thomas and Prudence traveled to Helena on business. During that trip, Thomas and Prudence had their first real vacation since their wedding. They stayed in a proper hotel, attended a concert, and enjoyed meals they did not have to cook themselves. It was pleasant, even exciting in its novelty, but both admitted to feeling relieved when they returned home to the ranch. I think we might be more Montana than we realized, Prudence said with amusement as their wagon rolled up to the familiar buildings. A week away and I missed everything: the smell of the prairie, the sound of the creek, even the constant wind. Home is where your heart is, Thomas replied, pulling her close. And my heart has been here with you since the day you stepped off that stagecoach 17 years ago. Prudence leaned into him, watching Nathan and Sarah rush out to greet them, followed by Maria and a handful of ranch hands. This place, these people, they were her whole world now, and she would not have it any other way. As the children grew into adulthood, both eventually found partners of their own. Nathan married Rebecca, the daughter of a neighboring rancher, in a ceremony that brought together two of the region's most prominent families. Sarah, true to her independent nature, fell in love with a surveyor from back east who was mapping the expanding rail lines. Marcus was not a rancher, but he was intelligent and adaptable, and he clearly adored Sarah. More importantly, he was willing to make his home at the Double T rather than asking Sarah to leave. The ranch house expanded further to accommodate the growing family. Soon there were grandchildren toddling around the yard, a new generation learning to love the land and the life it offered. Thomas, now silver-haired and called Grandpa more often than his given name, seemed to grow younger watching his grandchildren explore the ranch that had been his life's work. Prudence, approaching 50, found herself in the unexpected role of family matriarch. She taught her daughters-in-law the skills Maria had once taught her, shared hard-won wisdom about managing a ranch household, and cherished every moment with her grandchildren. She maintained her correspondence with Penelope, whose letters spoke of a satisfying life in New York, but also of occasional regret for the family connections she had sacrificed by running away all those years ago. One winter evening, with 3 grandchildren finally settled into bed and the house quiet, Thomas and Prudence sat before the fire in what had become their evening ritual. Thomas was working on a piece of leather tack, while Prudence mended a shirt for their youngest grandson. The comfortable silence between them was the product of decades of shared life. "I received a letter from Penelope today," Prudence said eventually. "She is thinking of coming for a visit next summer." Thomas looked up from his work. After all these years, that would be something. "How do you feel about that?" "Curious," Prudence admitted. "We were never particularly close, even as children, and her choices led to such unexpected consequences for both of us. But she is still my sister, and I think I would like to see her again to show her the life I have built." "The life we built," Thomas corrected gently. "Yes, the life we built," Prudence agreed with a smile. "Together." Penelope did visit the following summer, arriving on the train that now stopped in Williamsburg twice weekly. Prudence barely recognized the elegant woman who stepped onto the platform. Her sister had aged well, still beautiful at 52, though there was a certain brittleness to her, a fragility that suggested her glamorous life had not been as fulfilling as her letters claimed. The visit was initially awkward, with both sisters unsure how to bridge the decades of separation. But watching Penelope interact with Nathan and Sarah, with the grandchildren, something shifted. One evening, after the children had gone to bed, Penelope joined Prudence on the porch where she was enjoying the cool night air. "You have built something remarkable here," Penelope said quietly. "A real family, a real home. I can see how happy you are." "I am," Prudence confirmed. "Very happy." "But your letters always suggest you are happy too, with your theater work and your life in New York." Penelope was silent for a long moment. "I thought I would be," she finally admitted. "When I ran away from that marriage arrangement, I was so convinced I was choosing freedom and excitement over a boring, practical life. And I have had excitement, I suppose. I have performed in dozens of productions, met interesting people, lived in the greatest city in America. But I have also been alone, Prudence. No lasting connections, no family of my own, nothing permanent or real." "It is not too late," Prudence said gently. "You are still young enough to marry, to have a different life if that is what you want." "Maybe." Penelope did not sound convinced. "But I also think we each chose the path we were meant to walk. I needed the freedom I found, even if it came with loneliness, and you needed stability and purpose. That rancher, Thomas, he is perfect for you in ways he never would have been for me." "I know," Prudence said. "I think I have always known that. Fate works in strange ways, but I believe we both ended up where we belong." Before she left, Penelope pulled Prudence aside. "Thank you," she said, embracing her sister, "for taking my place, for saving the family's honor, and for not hating me for running away." "I could never hate you," Prudence replied. "You gave me the greatest gift, even if you did not mean to. You gave me the chance at this life." After Penelope's departure, Thomas found Prudence standing at the window, watching the sunset paint the prairie in shades of gold and red. "Thinking about your sister?" he asked, slipping his arms around her waist from behind. "Thinking about choices," Prudence said, leaning back against him. "About roads taken and not taken, about how one person's mistake can become another person's miracle. No regrets, not a single one." She turned in his arms to face him. "I love you, Thomas Irving. I have loved you since those first weeks when you were patient and honest with me, when you gave me the choice to stay or leave. I will love you until my last breath." "And I love you," Thomas replied, his voice rough with emotion even after all these years. "You made me believe in fate, Prudence. Made me believe that sometimes the universe knows what we need better than we do ourselves. I am glad it chose you. I will be glad of that choice every day for the rest of my life." They stood together as darkness fell over the ranch, holding each other as they had countless times before. Outside, the night sounds of the prairie began: cattle lowing in distant pastures, coyotes calling to each other across the grasslands, the eternal wind whispering through the cottonwood trees. Inside the house, their family slept safely, children and grandchildren all under one roof, all part of the legacy Thomas and Prudence had built together. It was not the life either of them had planned or expected, but it was exactly the life they were meant to have. Years continued their steady march. Thomas and Prudence grew older gracefully, eventually ceding most daily ranch operations to Nathan and Rebecca while remaining valuable advisors. Thomas still insisted on being present for important decisions and major events, and Prudence maintained her careful oversight of the household accounts and management. They celebrated their 30th anniversary with a party that brought people from all over Montana. Former ranch hands who had moved on to their own places returned to pay respects to the man who had taught them their trade. Neighbors with whom they had weathered droughts and harsh winters came to toast their enduring marriage. The new generation of Williamsburg residents, who had grown up knowing Thomas and Prudence as pillars of their community, came to honor them. As Prudence looked around at the celebration, at the faces of friends and family, at the ranch that had grown from a simple cattle operation into a thriving multi-generational enterprise, she felt profound gratitude. She thought about that frightened young woman who had stepped off the stagecoach 30 years ago, uncertain and anxious, taking her wayward sister's place out of duty. If she could go back and speak to that younger self, she would tell her not to be afraid. She would tell her that the dusty rancher examining her with disappointment would become the love of her life. She would tell her that the vast, intimidating prairie would become home in a way Boston never was. She would tell her that duty and obligation would transform into joy and purpose. But perhaps that younger Prudence had needed to discover all those things herself, needed to earn her place in this land and in Thomas's heart through her own efforts and determination. Thomas appeared at her elbow, offering her a glass of punch. "You look very serious for someone at her own anniversary party," he observed. "Just reflecting," Prudence said, accepting the glass. "It has been quite a journey, has it not?" "The best journey of my life," Thomas confirmed. He raised his glass. "To 30 more years," Prudence laughed. "That would make us ancient." "I do not care. I plan to spend every remaining day I have with you, however many that might be." They clinked glasses, drinking to a future that stretched before them with the same promise and potential it had held 3 decades earlier. As the years advanced into the new century, Thomas began slowing down. He was in his late 60s now, still sharp of mind but his body showing the wear of decades of hard physical labor. Prudence, 10 years younger, remained active, but she noticed her own limitations creeping in, joints that ached in cold weather, a tiredness that came more easily than it once had. But their love never diminished. If anything, it deepened with each passing year, refined by shared experiences and unwavering commitment. They had weathered storms, both literal and metaphorical. They had buried friends and celebrated births. They had built something lasting together, and that knowledge gave their days a sweetness that youth could never match. On a warm summer evening in 1902, 20 years after Prudence first arrived at the Double T Ranch, Thomas and Prudence sat together on the porch watching their great-grandchildren play in the yard. Nathan's oldest son had recently married and started his own family, making Thomas and Prudence the patriarch and matriarch of 3 generations. 4 generations on this land, Thomas mused, his hand finding Prudence's as naturally as breathing. "My father would have been proud." "He would have been proud of you," Prudence corrected. "You took what he started and made it extraordinary." "We made it extraordinary," Thomas said. "Never forget that, Prudence. This ranch, this family, this life, it all exists because you said yes, because you stayed, because you loved me back. Prudence felt tears prick her eyes, but they were happy tears. It was the easiest yes I have ever said. As the sun set on another day at the Double T Ranch, painting the Montana sky in those impossibly beautiful colors that still took Prudence's breath away even after all these years, she leaned against her husband's shoulder and felt complete peace. This was home. This was family. This was love in its truest, most enduring form. The journey that began with a sister's flight and a reluctant sacrifice had led to the greatest adventure and deepest happiness Prudence had ever known. And as she sat there surrounded by the tangible proof of a life well lived and well loved, she whispered a quiet thank you to whatever force, fate, providence, or simple chance had brought her to this place, to this man, to this life she would choose again and again and again. Thomas squeezed her hand gently, understanding without words what she was feeling. Because that was what 30 years together had given them, the ability to communicate in silence, to know each other's hearts as well as their own. "I love you," he said softly, the same words he had spoken thousands of times over their decades together, but never with any less meaning. "I love you too," Prudence replied, the words as true in that moment as they had been when she first spoke them, as they would be until her last breath. Always and forever. And that was the truth that defined their lives, the promise they had kept through all the years and all the challenges. They had built a love that was both foundation and shelter, both comfort and adventure. A love that had started as an unexpected substitute and grown into something rare and precious and eternal. As darkness settled over the Montana prairie and stars began appearing in the vast sky above, Thomas and Prudence remained on the porch, hands entwined, hearts beating in quiet rhythm. The ranch settled into its nighttime routines around them, and somewhere in the house, their family prepared for another day. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and new joys, as every day did. But tonight, they had this moment of perfect contentment, this quiet celebration of everything they had created together. And really, what more could anyone ask for than that?